You're listening to the Three Seeds Podcast, a show about native plants in the Midwest. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Elizabeth, and we've been walking around parks and gardens together for years.
In each show, we share interesting and fascinating facts about native plants.
Why 3 seeds? Well, we believe it takes 3 seeds to germinate great ideas.
We're 2 of the 3 seeds, and the third may very well be a plant, a person, or a cultivar.
Oh, no.
Just kidding. We are at the near north branch of the Chicago Public Library today, and we're so excited to be here this morning with Chef Jessica Walks First. I think I would love to just kick it over to you to introduce yourself.
I am Chef Jessica Walks First of Ketapanen Kitchen. We own the only Indigenous catering company in this area, Chicago's first and only Native American executive chef, educator, activist, entrepreneur, mom, grandma. That's pretty much sums me up.
That's a lot.
It is. It is. I wear many hats.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Okay, that is a very loaded question. What I do cannot be summed up in a small sentence, but I do catering, and our catering is very different from other catering companies, because I feel like what I do is I'm telling a story of my culture through food, and I want to give everyone the best experience possible. When you introduce a concept to Chicago that hasn't been done before, you have to become an educator. You have to tell the stories, because this is not just about catering. It's not just about food. It is about, sharing Indigenous history and culture through food. When I hit the ground running, I realized very quickly I needed to not just educate, but advocate for these things. Because if I can't get the supplies I need to create my menu, I have to figure out how to get them, why they're not easy to get, and what I can do to help that process. So I've branched out in many different areas in what I do. I go into universities and I take over their menu for a day and run Indigenous foods and do cultural ed with students in university level. I teach classes to youth. I work with the American Indians in Chicago not only as a board of directors, I'm the vice president of their board, but I just as a community member. I just last night pitched programming I'm going to offer there in the spring for Native families. So there's so many components to what I do. But if you wanted to sum them up, it's like chef, educator. So me going out and sharing it with the world and bringing visibility to our culture is really what I do.
Amazing. The name of your company, can you explain the background?
So the greatest ingredient you can ever put into food is love. Because food and preparing food and feeding people is an act of love. It's a sacred act. In our language, the word Ketapanen is an expression of love. So my son, who probably was a couple years old at the time, I made him spaghetti. And he was eating, and he was so, just like he was in love with the dish. And he's like, "You know what, Mom, you've got a Ketapanen kitchen." I was like, "I do." And it's stuck, and it's catchy enough.
And so how does that break down the words of Ketapanen and is there a way to translate it literally or
so
not really?
in our languages, one word can express an entire idea, a thought, a sentiment. Our words don't translate word for word into the English language. We didn't have a whole lot of words. Actually, people express more like ideas and thoughts and feelings. So, like if I tell my children I love you, it's Ketapanen. It's like when I'm talking about love, it's Ketapanen. It's that whole idea and thought of love, just the way food is summed up as love. A lot of variety into it, but, food, love.
That's beautiful. Can you tell us a little bit about your background?
My background is interesting. I did not figure out what I was going to do until 10 years ago. I've worked in a lot of different industries trying to find my path, but I feel like everything I ever did in life prepared me for this moment. It was only when I met my husband, he encouraged me to follow this path. He put me in school without my permission. We'll argue about that to the day we die. But it was
school.
In culinary school in Le Cordon Bleu. It was probably the best decision someone ever made for me, because I'd been cooking my whole life, but I never saw it as a career. I could cook for 100 people at 12 years old, because the way I was raised in a large Native community here in Chicago, I always spent time in the kitchens at the Indian Center, cooking for people, serving people, taking care of people. So it was second nature to me. So when I went to school and it was like, okay, I learned to apply technique to what I was doing. I learned all the necessities that you need to be able to run a business and apply it to what I already knew about cooking. You know, I didn't get it, the only part of school I didn't like was the weights and measurements, because I do not believe in following recipes. I think it's just, I feel like it's limiting. So
I so agree with you.
I don't think I've ever
Constant
followed a
discussion
recipe in my life.
at my household about that, but yes.
Yeah, so I mean, it made sense once I was in school that yes, I could do this. And even then, like, we pondered, what do I want to open a restaurant? We thought about a food truck for a really long time, but then the former executive director of Trickster Culture Center, Joe Podlasic, had called me one time, and he's like, hey, Jessica, I'm having this event, this, that, and the other. He's like, I need catering. I said, so what are you calling me for? He's like, oh, you're going to cater it. I said, I'm not a caterer. He's like, okay, well, you are now. And then he hung up on me and didn't give me an option to back out. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm doing this. And I learned the ropes as I went. I engaged one of my former teachers and my mentor, Chef John Abels, as a business partner, because he used to say, you are going to blow up. You are going to be wildly famous. You're going to do this. And I was like, no, I'm not. And I didn't even believe in myself, but he did. You know, and as we went through these last few years of really cultivating our concept, John was like, you really need to do native foods. He's like, look around you. That's a niche in the market nobody has cornered. And I was like, you're right. And that's what we've been doing. And I feel like the path unveiled itself. Like, every door that I needed to walk through to get to where I'm at kind of appeared before me. They may not have been open, but I got them open.
Mm-hmm. Was that once you were clear of your vision?
I think as it was revealing itself to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, when I'd get to a standstill, like, what should I do? What should I do? And then an opportunity would present itself. It's like, okay, we're going this way. I feel like the creator knew what path I needed to walk down. He just needed me to see it. It was a very interesting journey, and I think it was a very spiritually enlightening journey, because I learned a lot about myself as a person. I learned a lot about, the people around me. I created so many beautiful allyships and friendships and partnerships and collaborations that I feel like I found my place in the world. And I mean, it may have happened late in life, but I'm glad that I'm here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful.
I relate so much to that professional path, by the way. I've done a lot of different jobs as well, and sometimes doing those jobs I was like, what am I doing? Or it wasn't quite the fit. But I also felt like at the place I'm at now, I'm surprised how many of those jobs have come into play to what I'm doing today. Just like you were saying.
Yep, some things are just meant to be. I think the stars align for you when you're determined and you're passionate about something. I think, like, you just got to let yourself shine, and then it shines a light on all those doors that you're meant to open. I mean, you got to fail to succeed, and you have to have fear in order to have courage.
Can I also mention another thing? I understand you're from the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin.
Yes.
Okay. You were born on a reservation in Green Bay, is that correct?
The reservation is about 45 miles from Green Bay, so I was born there.
Okay. Yeah.
And can you talk a little? Yeah. I'm curious about the word Menominee also, because did a little research.
Yes.
Connects a little to the native plant part of this discussion.
Menominee means people of the wild rice. It grew in abundance on our reservation at one point. I mean, our ancestral homelands were vast, actually. At one point, they even extended down here. There's evidence that Menominee people were here when the glaciers receded here in the Chicago area. So, and wild rice is very prominent. So, our neighboring tribes referred to us as the people of the wild rice. And that's where that name came from.
And so, do you cook a lot of wild rice?
Absolutely.
And how discriminating are you about wild rice?
Very.
You are?
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
Tell us about that. We want to know.
Okay, so when you see wild rice in the stores, what you're seeing is machine cultivated, often grown in man-made patties. That's not real. Because wild rice is, such a beautiful food, and it takes on the flavor of its environment. And all the nutrients come from its environment. So if you're growing it in a man-made lake, you're not going to get those nutrients. You're not going to get that flavor. You're not going to get the story of that food. So yes, I am very discriminatory when it comes to rice. I will only use rice that's been processed in the traditional way. And by traditional, I mean people actually go out on canoes with knockers. They knock it in. They dance on the rice to loosen the hulls. They, dry it in big kettles over fires. They winnow it in baskets, and it comes these beautiful colors. Like you see it in the store, and it's a really shiny black rice. True wild rice is very matte colored. It ranges in colors from like purples, obsidians, browns, oranges, even reds. And it's a really beautiful food. Like, and for me, I've worked with wild rice so much that I can tell if it's been grown in Minnesota. I can tell if it's been grown in Wisconsin. I can tell if it's been grown in Michigan because it has a very distinctive flavor. Even smell, like I can smell it and say, oh, it came from this state.
No way.
Yeah, because
that's amazing.
It takes on the flavor of its environment. So when I have rice that comes from my reservation, I can taste it. Because you can go down to the wild rice beds on our reservation and just smell. You can smell the environment. And that smell comes through in the rice. Because, smell and taste go hand in hand. And, like, I know that what home smells like, and that's what home should taste like.
Right. And so when you were young, growing up, were you eating wild rice on a regular basis?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
It played a big role in terms of your...
Absolutely. Wild rice and venison. Oh my God, I ate so much venison and fish as a child. I don't even like it as an adult. Wild rice, though, is so versatile. I love it because I cook a lot of different dishes with it. But, there were a lot of staples in our home. I mean, granted, we were also forced to use government commodities, but, we had a family full of men who hunted. We had, people, if they do, engage in traditional practices of ricing and making hull corn and stuff. So there was a lot of access to traditional foods. Even when we moved away from the reservation, and we moved away when I was 5 to start school here in Chicago. Going home, we'd come back with stuff. Every time I drive to my reservation now, I load up with whole corn. I load up with wild rice. I'll grab maple syrup. If people have got venison backstrap, I'm grabbing it. I'll make sure that I get all those goods from home because I know I can't get them here.
Yeah, I was reading that wild rice is a whole grain,
Yes.
high in protein, far more nutrients and dietary fiber than domesticated rice.
Yes.
And I also saw there's a PBS show called America Outdoors with Baratunde Thurston.
Okay.
He's a comedian, writer, but he actually went out on a canoe in Minnesota with a few people who did the indigenous harvesting method. And it was so beautiful because when they were knocking it, like drawing the grass over the boat and then knocking it, it was to a heartbeat rhythm. I thought that was so beautiful.
Yeah, it is a beautiful practice. And again, all that love goes into it. Like I always say, you can tell when food has been grown with love, when it's been harvested with love, when it's been cooked with love. It's present in that food. You feel it. It's like an energy that comes off that food. And you're not going to find that in Uncle Ben's wild rice.
I forgot that was a thing. Yeah.
Oh, Uncle Ben, you're just not making the cut.
Yeah,
Sorry.
not making the cut.
No.
Sorry.
I read, tell me if this is true or not, that it tends to get harvested in September with the wild rice moon.
Yes. So every moon corresponds to a harvest. So usually the moon that rises in August starts the season. It goes from I want to say mid to late August into September, like mid to late September. I don't know the exact dates, but it's about a 4-week period of harvesting that happens during that moon.
Okay.
Wow. What, is that the only time that it's harvested?
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh.
I
so
mean,
it's a huge operation. Everybody has to pitch in and
yes,
get involved.
It is. And like I said, again, these moons dictated harvested, every harvest. That's how people knew when things were ready to harvest based on those moons. So they knew when this moon came, it was time to harvest that wild rice because then towards September, we start getting colder weather. We start getting windier. And what happened? And then we get rain too in that period. Maybe 2-3 years ago, we had massive hailstorms during the beginning of September, and it cut the wild rice season in half because the hail knocked the rice into the water.
Yeah.
So once it loosens, you have to take it down because then it starts to fall naturally, or the weather can knock it down, and there goes your rice.
Yeah.
It's all for the birds at that point.
For the fish.
For the fish, it goes to the bottom.
Yeah, it sinks to the bottom.
Yeah, yeah. And I also read that, when it's being harvested, some goes in the canoe and some does fall to the bottom of the of the muddy bottom, and it germinates the seeds down there for
natural
more.
reseeding.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that's so cool. That makes sense.
I read that in 2018, the White Earth Nation of Ojibwe granted Menominee certain rights comparable to granting it to legal personhood, giving it the right to exist and flourish like a person is given that right. In 2021, the Ojibwe filed a lawsuit on behalf of Wild Rice to stop the Enbridge Line 3 oil sands pipeline, which puts the plant's habitat at risk. I thought that was so incredible.
It is, but we have to fight for those plants because if you look historically, wild rice grew all the way down here, down in the Calumet River region. It was vast. If you look on my own reservation, what exists now to what used to be there, colonization, industrialization, encroachment has caused the loss of wild rice beds. I mean, if I have to drive 500 miles to get wild rice, there's a problem. And, these pipelines and mines and all that things that can poison our water and our soil will affect the waterways where these natural plants grow. So if we don't fight against them, we not only stand to lose that plant itself, but we lose the history. In 7 generations from now, if there's no wild rice for my great-grandchildren, how are they going to know the story of that food if we don't fight to protect it now?
And not only losing all of that culture and history and tradition, but also nutrients.
Yes.
Right? Like you were saying about Uncle Ben's, like, no way that's measuring up.
Yeah, the nutritional value is non-existent, and the stuff you find in stores.
Right.
You can, I just say, if you've had real wild rice, you can tell the difference. I mean, it's such a beautiful food, but again, when we start playing God with foods and genetically modifying them, and we start, monocropping things that shouldn't be monocropped and all that, we change that nutritional value in that food. Even the soil, it changes the soil.
Yeah.
We've done a lot of harm to our planet and our foodways by doing these things. I mean, you look at America right now, we're one of the unhealthiest countries in the world, and we're supposed to be a superpower, right? But we've put money in front of the health of our people. We have put money in front of traditional growing practices that keep our soil clean, that, prevent us from being sustainable, growers and feeders. Like I could go on for days about this.
It's all connected, right? It's all
right.
a chain reaction.
It is. Yeah. And so now people are talking, well, we've done all this damage to the land. Now, how do we fix it? You know how you fix it? Progress is regress. You go back, you clean your soil, you start growing in traditional ways. You put plants together where they nurture one another. You restore traditional seeds and start growing them again. That's what you do. That's how we save the foodways. But
I would just love to hear your definition of native foods.
My definition of native foods, well, we'll start with the fact that 75% of grown foods are indigenous. And so for me, foods that were once grown in this country, and I'm not like talking pre-colonization stuff, foods that have not been genetically modified and altered, those to me are indigenous foods. I mean, we eat a lot of those foods every day. There's no recognition. I mean, obvious ones are corns, beans, and squash. But things like tomatoes, things like potatoes, berries, all different varieties of berries, nuts, all these things are indigenous foods. But they don't get that accolade because no one is out there teaching curriculum about indigenous foods, except for me. I'm working on it. Well, I mean, there's a lot of native chefs that are actually working on it. I mean, I don't say a lot, but there's about 20 of us in this country who try to share that knowledge, and it's a growing field. We're starting to see more emergence of native chefs, which I think is a beautiful thing. And even ones that aren't chefs, like food is medicine is a theme that is blowing up in Indian country because we're all trying to get back to that knowledge and, preserving traditional foodways. When we think about foods that are indigenous, think about things that are healthy, clean, and good for your body. Things that grew here in abundance before colonization and industrialization changed them. Well,
I did a tiny bit of research. Going back to the rice dish, Menominee. You mentioned somewhere that you flavor it with blackberries, strawberries, raspberries, nuts, and maple syrup.
Yes. The recipe that dish you're talking about, with the wild rice, berries, and maple, that recipe itself is thousands of years old. Our people have been making that dish for ceremony and celebration for thousands of years, and other tribes in the Great Lakes region have as well. It's one of those dishes that has stood the test of time. It's a beautiful dish. It's versatile. I just served it to a classroom full of kids in Skokie yesterday.
Oh, really?
You can serve it cold in the summer. You could serve it warm in the winter. You can turn it into a pudding, a porridge. It's very, very versatile, and it's beautiful, and it's simplistic. You know, you don't need a lot of heavy seasonings and all these fancy things to add. Just the way the berries and the rice and the maple work together and the nuts, it complements and highlights each other, and that's what native foods should do.
You talked about not really wanting to get too exact with measurements and whatnot, but I do hope to buy a cookbook from you at some point so I can remake some of these dishes. Just a thought. I've already thought it.
There's been a demand for it from many, many of my clients. I am looking at doing it. My biggest challenge will be converting recipes, because like I measure with my hands, my fingers. I know, pour this much in, put this, throw this pinch in. I do it that way. I don't know, like I had to standardize my fry bread recipe, and even that, it was like, okay, so my partner Johnny's like, just get a bowl, throw your handful in, and then weigh it. You know, and weigh every ingredient the way you measure it with your hands, and then we'll use that and convert it to tablespoons and teaspoons and whatnot. So that's kind of what we've been doing. But my menu is vast, and the dishes I'd like to offer in a cookbook would be kind of along that premise of figuring out what's what and how much to use. So I think when I have time to dedicate to that kind of, you know, compiling data, it'll happen. But it's going to happen. I can promise you guys that.
So when you're catering for, like, let's say 200 people, you're just like, I'm going to throw this many handfuls of this, and you get the same result each time, more or less.
Yeah.
That's the argument in my household. Like, you can never make this again, Steph, because you just, like, you know, you just opened the refrigerator and found stuff. It turned out well, but, like, everything is a one-off for me. So you have some kind of, like, even in your hand, like muscle memory or something.
You know what? There are muscle memories. I guarantee you that. I can attest to that. But like too, like visual too.
Yeah.
Like I know, like if I'm using this pan, there needs to be this much in this or that much in this. If I'm seasoning, I know that this much should be laying on top before I mix it. Like those are like memories ingrained in me too.
But why couldn't you write recipes in that way? I feel like that would actually, I mean, I would like that kind of recipe.
There are people that think like us.
Yeah.
And there are people who can't process that way. And I've learned that. Like doing demos last year, I did several demos for the Chicago Public Library. And I did a soup recipe. And I didn't measure anything. I just had all these ingredients. There was no real name for the dish because we don't name our dishes. It's not like, you know, other cuisines. It's just, it's heart cooking. You know, you cook what tastes good and what feels good and what works well together. So I was just kind of adding things, and I was telling you, you don't have to use this. If you don't like it, don't use it. If you like it, put more in it. You judge by what you like and what feels good to you, how much you use. I think children are the perfect sponge to absorb this knowledge, to teach them how to cook, to teach them to, you know, understand growing and sustainability and healthy eating. They're the sponge for it. And you just have to give them those tools and they will flourish. So
kind of going off of that comment about sustainability, and like, I'd just love to know for you, you know, I don't know if you have noticed, but there is like a lot more interest in native plants and native gardening. I think it started with the pandemic. There are just a lot of people not going anywhere.
Yes.
And so, you know, there's been a huge increase in people like buying seeds or buying plants or seed swaps, all this other stuff that we're discovering too, like even just through this podcast. What do you think that these new to native plant people, what do you think they should be thinking about or considering as they get into this, especially as it relates to native foods?
I think, you know, understanding. So I agree. I think during the pandemic, a light went on and a switch flipped because, you know, people are doing canning now and homesteading and preserving and growing for themselves. Well, I think is absolutely beautiful. We should be doing those things. And I think, you know, when they're doing this, keep in mind that the real food justice comes when you share that knowledge. If you learn to do this, share with your community. You know, find a garden space. If you know how to do these things, find an empty lot, grow a garden for your community, feed your community. The more people that step up and share that knowledge, share those skill sets,
share those spaces,
the more growing spaces we have access to healthier foods. You create a ripple that starts a wave, and we could be a healthier country in a few years if everybody took that knowledge they've gained about seed saving and sharing and growing and planting and all those good things and started sharing it and building it out. We'd have a network of growers across the country and communities that would really help sustain people, but also financially. I mean, look how much money people save by growing. I mean, and DeKalb, the university out there, I did some work with them. They have multiple growing spaces throughout the campus where they grow food that all the students have access to. So you imagine if a university could do that, what if every neighborhood did that? How many people would we feed? How many less people would go hungry? How many kids would have access to healthier meals if we started creating community growing spaces by sharing the knowledge we learned about seeds and growing and harvesting?
I also feel like that is just such a beautiful sentiment, because I think sometimes new hobbies, people are a little precious about them in a way. Like, oh, I want, there are the perfectionists in the group, but they're people who are experimenting. Maybe they don't feel like they can share, or, oh, it's in my garden, it's my yard, etc. But this idea of like finding ways to share what you're learning, finding ways to share food with each other is amazing. And I think it would be so cool if in all of that sharing that people were really thinking about, like, let's go even further and let's look at those native varieties of squash. We don't need to get the perfect squash from somewhere else. Like, the perfect squash is already right here.
Right, exactly. Plants always thrive in an environment where they've previously grown. So if we actually looked at what grew here in abundance and actually focused on those plants, we could feed the masses. Right. So if people don't look at that, and I'm not sure why, I've noticed that too in my own research. There's very few people who actually focus on what's grown in that region and how do we restore it.
But isn't it also just availability? Like, if you've never been exposed to a squash that's from where you live,
you wouldn't know about it. For it. But there are seed banks that I forgot which universities carry them, but there's some in this region that carry those seed banks where you can contact them. They can tell you what grew here, and they may have seeds for you.
What for you would make you say, okay, I'm done? Meaning, in a good way, you feel like you have really achieved what you set out to do. What would a picture of success be for you?
Okay, this is a very big picture. I don't think I'll ever be done, but I will feel accomplished when I am not the only Native American restaurant food service provider in the city of Chicago. I will feel accomplished when our farm is up and running and we're actively teaching. I will feel accomplished when I see more garden spaces going up in the city of Chicago and surrounding areas, when we're actually feeding our kids in Chicago public schools healthy food. I will say, okay, I've done enough. I can sit back and relax and let somebody else take the reins.
Lovely.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of everything that you are working towards and what you're doing already. I hope to one day get to try your food.
Order some on Dwell Social.
Okay.
Dwell Social, I have meal kits that are available for delivery. Our website is ketapanenkitchen.com. We have a Facebook page. We have Instagram. We're working on TikTok. I just have to learn more how to use the platform.
Chef Walks First, thank you so much for coming all the way over here to meet with us.
Yeah.
And talk with us.
Thank you guys for having me. It was a pleasure.
Such a sincere pleasure. And honestly, we just wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gosh, I just really enjoyed hearing about her story. And native plants are so vital to what she's doing. And she has connected the dots so far to the past and to the future.
Yeah, and I love her educational component too.
Yeah.
Because that's how things keep going.
Yeah. Just amazing. She's just operating on multiple fronts. Total powerhouse.
Yes. I expected nothing less too.
Yeah. Well, now it's time for the plant reveal.
All right. Well, full disclosure on this one. I am very handsy with this plant, but in my defense, everyone I know and respect is also very handsy with this. One hint is I grew up with this plant in New Mexico and have loved it ever since. And speaking of today's show, it's an ingredient that's really important in indigenous Native American cuisine. Can you guess?
Sumac.
It's called Salvia azurea grandiflora.
Salvia. Is that sage?
Yeah. And you know a sage by its luxurious, sagey smell and a great sage flavor. This plant, in this respect, is all about the foliage when it comes to smell and taste. So this is wild blue sage, and it's in the mint family, which is also a very odoriferous plant.
Totally odoriferous.
Totally. Sadly, though, this native variety is listed in this state as having a status of threatened.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It's a nice tall plant. It's anywhere from 2.5 to 5 feet tall. It's unbranched with central stems that are slightly pubescent.
And that
Huh?
means,
Ooh. Can you
does that
guess?
mean they have like strong mood swings and unpredictable behavior?
You're thinking prepubescent in humans. But yes, in botany, this refers to a layer of fine hairs. So 3 to 5 inches long by 3/4 inches wide are the leaves, and they're
wow.
grayish green, narrowly lanceolate. Remember, we've gone over this before. That means kind of spearheaded shaped, with serrated edges towards the tip. And, they've got these whorled, I love this word, whorled spikes of flowers. That means the flowers are going around concentrically in a spiral, whorled. You can kind of think of that song, "You spin me right round, baby, right round." Tell me you know that song.
I do know that song.
Okay, yeah. Think of that when you think of whorled.
Isn't it whorled?
The flowers are pale blue to deep dark blue. They're tubular, bell-shaped. They're just beautiful. I think most people kind of know the look of sage flowers,
Yeah.
but it's kind of beautifully designed because they have a small upper lobe and a large lower lobe that function as a landing pad for visiting insects.
So they're odoriferous, they're tubular.
They're tubular. And of course, it has a specific purpose, this shape of the flower, and that is a landing pad for long-tongued insects.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, when you think long-tongued insect, you're thinking bumblebees, butterflies. They're really incredible.
And what about that one moth, the hummingbird moth?
Oh, yeah. That's got a deep reach.
I don't know, the overtones or undertones of this.
I know.
Oh,
It's just, and it carries on. It really does. We talked vertebrates in episode 1.
Mm-hmm.
Can we briefly mention now mammalian herbivores?
Okay.
These would be your grazers like deer, etc. Well, good news. This plant, animals avoid these mammalian herbivores. They avoid this plant as a food source because apparently they don't like the sage scent that I love. Or the scent is associated for them with indigestion from chemicals that disrupt bacterial populations in their digestive tracts.
Oh my.
Yeah, so we're thinking, you can grow this in your yard and the deer aren't going to be grazing it. I was curious, do you have this one in your yard?
I am a little ashamed to say that early in my gardening experience, I did get salvia, but I don't think it's the native variety. It said native, but it was from Home Depot. Not sure.
And the funny thing is, being that it's threatened, I'm kind of surprised in a way because it's kind of an easygoing plant. Maybe you noticed this with your salvia as well. It prefers sunny, okay, but also it can take dry, well-drained variety of soils, including soils that have significant amounts of loam, clay, or gravel. It can tolerate high pH soils, and the seeds germinate easily, often producing flowers in year 1.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, often you could actually get the plant to flower multiple times if you prune.
Oh, really?
I don't know if it's the case with this one, but yeah.
Okay, that's interesting to hear. Anyways, yeah, give it a try.
Well, that was a lovely plant reveal. Thank you. Elizabeth. Yeah, this time I decided to do a what the heck is.
What?
It seems like a really self-explanatory concept, but then I started looking into it more. I was just, let's say, inspired by the recent massively sub-zero temperatures that we've been experiencing for like a week. So I was thinking, how do the trees and plants survive? Because it's really been very, very, very cold here. Like,
yeah, I know. And
what was it, like a high of 3?
Yeah, I've been looking outside too at my plants. Like, what is this like for you guys?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I thought, okay, I know there's this term called overwintering. What I found out was kind of fascinating. It's also kind of relevant to people who have driven cars in the 90s. And I'll explain why later. But, just trying to figure out, how does a plant return from this deep freeze and come back and like blossom in the spring and keep going, keep going, producing leaves, etc. Last time in the plant reveal, I talked about the skunk cabbage and its ability to heat itself up with thermogenesis. Plants that don't change the temperature around them, they have to do something else. And so the first thing is this process of overwintering. It's kind of like multi-step process. Okay, so the first step in this process happens in the fall. The plants drop their leaves, and that is in order to reduce the surface area subjected to cold and freezing conditions. Okay, so it's like, oh, it's getting a little chilly out here. Those leaves drop off. The next thing they do when there's the first freeze is they send water down to their roots, which are, much further below ground, so less likely to freeze. Another thing they do is they replace their water with sap of some kind. I don't think every plant does this, but many do, especially trees. And many trees have sap, not just, sugar maple trees. It's just sap that maybe you don't want to drink.
So the water's going down to the roots, and the sap
and they replace the water with sap, okay, which is, I guess, less subject to freezing. But they also secrete antifreeze. And that's why I'm talking about cars in the 90s. Okay. They secrete antifreeze proteins to tolerate the cold temperatures. So they use calcium, hormones like ethylene and jasmonic acid, that sounds super trippy, to inhibit ice crystal growth. So basically, you're looking at these trees, they're filled with antifreeze. And now, of course, scientists are trying to figure out how to copy this phenomenon so they can, use this for genetically modified food crops.
Oh.
Yeah. But it's interesting. So when they're doing this, inhibiting ice crystal growth, what it means is it's not trying to necessarily prevent ice from growing at all, but it's trying to limit the size of the ice crystal. So basically, ice crystals are made up of many little tiny branches, and they're the antifreeze is shortening the branches.
So it's
of the ice
smaller
crystals.
Smaller crystals?
Yes.
Somehow that has just a less of a detritus impact.
Yes. Not as much ice.
Yeah. Brilliant. Once again, brilliant.
Yeah. So overwintering is kind of a pretty amazing process.
Yeah, they got it.
Yeah.
Side note is 1990s cars had antifreeze, but we don't have them now in our
Do
cars.
you put antifreeze in your car now?
I just wonder if the tank is just more I don't know, it just stays full.
I'm not exactly a mechanic.
But I feel like in your 1990s experience, you must have had something go on with your antifreeze.
Well, we had a European car that was diesel, and let's just say it was rough. Embarrassing even to drive that thing. Started up in the high school parking lot with plumes of smoke way, way, way off into the distance. And I'm pretty sure antifreeze played a major role in even getting that car to high school in the first place.
Well, just don't do what my husband Ross did, which was accidentally put antifreeze in the windshield wiper fluid compartment.
Isn't it mixed in?
I don't know. Again, I'm also not a mechanic, but it's not working as
I
well.
think
I'll
that
tell you that.
I think that show is called Car Talk, and that's not us.
So tune into Car Talk for more on that. But you've been listening to Three Seeds Natives podcast.
Bye-bye.
Bye.